what we have is people who are experts in mediation. We go through each one. Laila here, she is a very, very experienced lawyer. She's probably one of the pioneers in the space of mediation in India, and she's been working with people outside of India in many spaces in the US and Singapore and other places. Tara, her daughter, she is a lawyer too, and between them, they run a company called CAMP, which is into mediation. Aparna works with them, so Chitra as well. Chitra has been a corporate executive for several years with Pepsi and several other companies, and she too is actively involved in mediation. The reason we wanted to bring mediation into this space of coaching is for two purposes. One, we believe that interventions which are somewhat similar, though the processes may be different to coaching, would be tremendously valuable to coaches in order for us to learn more about them and perhaps also participate in those. In case of mediation, this could be an enormous advantage for coaches for them to be trained over a period of time and also become mediators themselves. So in fact, there have been people who are not lawyers who have entered the space of mediation, who are now being trained. Vijay is on the panel now. She's one of those coaches. She's a master coach. She's certified as a mediator at this point in time. I'm personally certified, and there will be more number of people who would be coming in here over a period of time. So today, what we wanted the panel to be here is to have them explain to you what the process of mediation is. In some ways, I believe that coaching competencies are pretty much aligned to mediation, conflict resolution, mediation as a process. But Laila would explain to you the nuances of in what ways mediation would be different. Chitra would probably come in and talk about how mediation can be very helpful in the space of the corporates, both internally and externally. And it's very possible that many of you might be over a period of time be attracted to and be interested in mediation, both for yourself to take part in or for the organizations that you work with in order to resolve disputes as an extension of coaching itself. The October colloquium, we would again have people from CAMP participating along with their US counterparts to present a program which probably goes into more detail about what the process of mediation would be. This is more an awareness program. And we hope that by next year, we would be able to start a mastery webinar, which would be on mediation to certify people along with ICF certification as well for about 30 hours in mediation also. That is something Magda would be announcing later during this year. So at this point in time, let me introduce you to the panel. Laila Olapalli here, Tara, Aparna, and Chitra. And I would invite Laila to go in first to tell us all about what mediation is and what mediation is not. On to you, Laila. You're muted. You're muted. Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
So, hello, everybody. Wonderful to be a part of this, and thank you for the opportunity. So, Ram, I can share with you all my experience in mediation and how I feel that today the world has opened up the space to so many people. 30 years ago, when I joined the legal profession, it was a very, very static space. All that we did was litigation and arbitration. But over the past few years, especially in India, the last 10 years, has made the dispute resolution space a very dynamic space. And this has come about with the introduction of the alternative dispute resolution, and mediation seems to be the mantra. In these past few years, I've seen every high court in the country, that is, we have about 25 high courts, all of them having, almost all of them, having a court annex mediation program. Many of our recent legislations, like the Companies Act, the Commercial Courts Act, the real estate laws, they've all included mediation. Recently, I think today's paper said the income tax is also looking at mediation. And on August 7th, India signed the Singapore Mediation Convention, which gives enforceability to a cross-border mediated settlement. So really, there is so much of conversations going on. In fact, there are conversations of whether mediation and arbitration can be combined. These are all interesting developments. So we are excited in this space. Now, to go into what is mediation. Mediation is a process where a third party neutral helps disputing parties resolve the dispute, help them to find mutually acceptable solutions. And the essential features of mediation, I think coaches are very familiar with. Self-determination. This is the only dispute resolution process which leaves the dispute, the resolution, the outcome entirely to the parties. So this process is based on self-determination. It is confidential. It is voluntary. The parties can opt to stay in or move out at any point of time. It is also very flexible. And it is that flexibility of the process that makes it really dynamic. Why do I say flexible? The process is such that it is not bound by any of the legal structures of litigation. For example, the Evidence Act, Civil Procedure Code, none of these applies to mediation. So since it is party controlled, it is self-determination, party autonomy is the most important. So these kind of legal structures are not applicable to mediation. Similarly, lawyers, it's not mandatory that lawyers are a part of the process. They can come in if the parties want to have legal perspectives, lawyers are brought in. Similarly, you can bring in other experts, technical experts, financial experts, maybe some relative who has an influence on the decision making of the parties can all come into the process and bring in information onto the table to help the parties resolve their dispute. Even the mediator doesn't necessarily have to be a judge or a lawyer. You can have a judge, you can have a lawyer, you can have subject experts, you can have coaches. For example, the Reliance dispute, which is one of the biggest companies in the country, when they had a dispute, they chose Mr. C.V. Kamath, who is not a lawyer or a judge, who is an expert in the business field. These parties wanted to have somebody who can really understand business and business relationships. So he was chosen as the mediator. Today, the profession is really opening to non-legal people. So mediation can be by any of these subject experts or anybody else, provided the parties choose them to be a mediator. So this is what really gives the flexibility to the mediation process. And I can actually, I think what is the most important for a mediator is the process expertise. How do you use this process? The subject experts, we can bring them in, but the process expertise is really what the mediator should have. And in order to explain the process expertise, I can use an example of a mediation which I did recently. Um, and we didn't have lawyers in this mediation. It was a dispute between two heads of departments in a company. This was a German company. And these department heads were really finding it difficult to get along with each other. There was a conflict. The environment in the company became toxic. And that's when the management approached me. And I think this example would resonate with the coaching crowd. So how did I go about this? Well, the first step that I did was to understand what is the objective of the company. I realized it was enhanced collaboration between these department heads. I spoke to some crucial people to get an understanding of what was happening, what the company needed. Then we designed the process. A mediator designs the process. Each dispute is so unique that we design it. Who are the people who should come onto the table? What are the documents? What is the kind of information? So this is all designed, and that was the first step that we went through. And the objective, of course, as I mentioned, was enhanced collaboration. So we kind of planned that the outcome of the mediation, the goal in the mediation, would be to get the parties to work out enhanced collaboration worksheet. They would prepare that, say party A and party B would prepare that worksheet, and the management would approve it, how they are comfortable with that worksheet. So the first, after this was structured and designed, the first two sessions, I had separate sessions with each of the parties. And that session was to really, I would say it was kind of conflict coaching that you all frequently do, trying to understand what is the conflict about, what are their perspectives, to connect with them, to build a rapport. So that's what we did. And also help them to tell their story, and in a way that they see themselves not as victims, but as players. When you become part of the problem, you become a part of the solution. So that's a kind of a shift that I worked with them for on the first session. That was the first two sessions were separately with the parties. Then the third session is when I brought them together, and I would call that the enhanced collaboration dialogue, which was created. And essentially, that was a dialogue using active listening techniques, where they were able to have some of those difficult conversations with me guiding them on active listening techniques. So in this session is when they understood each other, at least they tried to understand each other's perspectives. They tried to work with underlying interests of both the parties, build some kind of bridges that were built. That was the enhanced collaboration dialogue session. The next session, both the parties worked at what they would need from each other and from the organization in order to move and align themselves more to the values of the company. So in this session, together they prepared a wish list of what they may need. And the last session was when the management also came in and gave their inputs to the wish list. And we finally prepared the enhanced collaboration worksheet. And the elements of this enhanced collaboration worksheet, one, how would they handle differences in the future? They had their own thoughts on that. Secondly, how would they improve their communication? What are the activities they need in the organization to improve their communication and build a rapport to connect the teams together? They also worked at how do they get over the obstacles that existed and which were common irritants. So these were all factors that were there in that enhanced collaboration worksheet. And it's later when I met the CEO, she said that the environment in the office is much lighter. They were, and then I reminded the CEO that the requirements in the worksheet were to be there on an ongoing basis. It is not something which will happen immediately, but they knew how they would work with this. And it was something that they created. It was self-determination. And I am confident that they will continue to work with this. So this is why, Ram, I feel that there are many similarities. There are differences in the sense we work with several parties. But at the same time, there are so many elements of coaching that goes into the mediation session. When we have our private sessions, it is coaching. We help them to continue the relationship using coaching techniques. So mediation uses several aspects of coaching, and I believe this is a transferable skill. Mediators can learn how to be coaches, and coaches can learn how to be mediators. So this is my view on that.
Excellent, Laila. Thank you very much indeed. I just want to share with the audience a couple of things. One is that the way that Laila explained it, many of you would have picked up. And I mean, I have not presented to her the IC of coaching competencies, but the concepts of active listening and preparing in terms of contracting and so on and so forth are so much in line with what in coaching one does. Primarily, the difference that I see at a most superficial level, as it were, is that by and large, we tend to use coaching as a one-on-one interaction. So you have a client and you have a coach, but many of us are now moving into the larger systemic coaching space where there are multiple people involved. So mediation is basically a form of systemic intervention where the coaching skills could be very powerful. Like Laila explained, it's not about the subject matter expertise. It could be in a technology company where you need somebody who's a technology expert. It could be in a banking and finance industry where there could be a guy who's a financial expert, like she mentioned in the case of Reliance, a business expert. And there could be someone standing by as a lawyer to be able to advise on certain issues which might get complicated. But a large part of the process is very, very simply one which is very similar to coaching, which is about resolution. And the resolution, in this particular case, this form of mediation, as Vijay and I both went through this program that was arranged by CAMP about a couple of months ago, it's called interest-based negotiation. And in interest-based negotiation, I couldn't find any difference at all between what we did as coaches and what we were required to do as mediators as well. And Laila was also talking about something called transformational mediation, which probably for many coaches who are deeper into that whole aspect of awareness creation, it's probably far more important. Laila, would you like to speak briefly about transformational coaching? And in the meantime, if any of the people in the audience have any questions, they can put them up in the chat box and I can convey them to you.
Yes, Ram. Essentially, we mediators say that there is evaluative mediation, facilitative mediation, and transformational mediation. Evaluative is when there is a need for strong legal kind of analysis, and it's very evaluative. You predict what the outcome in court would be, and they say judges are very good at evaluative mediation. Facilitative mediation is where you facilitate those conversations and get those kind of evaluations if it's required from the lawyers. The example that I gave you in my now, that is a transformative mediation. You are kind of working with the parties to transform the way they look at things. So there is, I think that's where coaching possibly is really useful, because you work with them to look at things a little differently. Sometimes in matrimonial mediations, or in mediations like this, or sometimes even in family mediations, brothers or families in dispute, there is more of transformative mediation.
There's a question here, Laila. In case there is from Deepika, in case there is a conflict in the wish list of the incumbents in an organization, who resolves this? Is it the organizational call? I guess what she means is it a coach? Is it a mediation specialist? I'm not quite sure what the meaning of that is.
Well, some nowadays, especially in the Western countries, they have in-house mediation facilities. It's not yet there in organizations here, and that's why they refer it to an outside mediator. Yeah, I think that's, okay. Have I answered that question?
Yeah, in case, Deepika, if you have, I mean, if that is not answered, if you can just put it in the chat more clearly, what is it that you're really looking for? And Pradeep has asked, does becoming a mediator require accreditation or a licensing of any form?
Okay, so we really have not come to accreditation. If you are a court annex mediator, then the court certifies you. Otherwise, if you do a mediation with CAMP certifies. The government has not really come with any accreditation as yet.
Yeah, just to add to that is, of course, there are bodies like the Singapore Mediation Council,
yeah,
and the
the
Netherlands Mediation Council, which are globally recognized bodies similar to the International Coaching Federation, who provide you the mediation, which currently is CAMP, working towards getting the accreditation training facilities with them so that they can eventually do that here as well. So at the moment, there are a few mediation training agencies. CAMP is one of the probably the most experienced in this space as far as I know, and that's where we attended it. There's a question, can you explain the difference between facilitative and transformative a bit more, Laila?
Okay. So in a facilitative mediation, it is the mediator facilitates the communication. Mediator facilitates the information coming onto the table, and helps the parties to take an informed decision. But the mediator really does not work too much at the transformation of the person. It is always, we do deal with the past to the extent that is required to help the parties really explain their the motivation for the dispute, what is the underlying interest, and also to help them handle some of the emotions so that they can come into a situation where they can take good informed decisions. So the extent of transforming the person is limited. Whereas in a transformative mediation, like the mediation that I explained to you, we put in place systems so that they can continue to work together, and it is something which is on an ongoing basis. In fact, one of the requirements was that they would get help with a coach. If the conflict gets hard for them to manage, they would go and get help. The organization would provide them with coaching support. So a transformational mediation is attempting to transform the behavioral patterns to some extent.
Yeah, Laila, we both talked about it. Austin, just to go into this, when Laila and I had a discussion earlier, that is where we found probably the greatest synergy between coaching, where creating awareness is a very important part of the whole process. And normally in mediation, you may not necessarily go deeper into that awareness creation. It's primarily about getting into an endpoint where both the parties are able to agree on something, move on ahead with it, and they want to settle their dispute and move on ahead. But there are certain cases where if it is possible to create a much deeper awareness of in terms of how their interests can be made congruent, for example, if that is likely to happen, then the whole mediation process itself takes a very transformational nature, such as what a coaching would do in a systemic multiple client interfacing. Interesting question from Ruta, Laila. What kind of cases is mediation that you are referring to as more relevant to application, family, marriage, business? And the other part of the question is, isn't family marriage mediation more like a counseling? What are the additional qualifications that would be needed for a mediator?
There is a difference between counseling and mediation. Counseling is when you really go deep into the, the effort is to heal the person. That's counseling. Whereas mediation, our objective is very clear. How do you resolve the dispute? So mediation, we focus on the terms of settlement, how the resolution can happen. And yes, you're right, in family disputes, in matrimonial disputes, the mediator has to be much more engaged with the transformational or the emotional aspects than in commercial disputes. That doesn't mean that in commercial disputes there are no emotions. There are plenty of emotions that we deal with, but often in commercial disputes there is no ongoing relationship after the mediation, or not too often. But in case of family disputes, matrimonial disputes, there is much more of a need for ongoing relationship structures to be put in place. Yeah.
Just to add to what you're saying, Laila, Ruta, when I try to explain at a very basic level the differences between coaching, counseling, consulting, therapy, and so on, I generally use two axes. The vertical axis being a spectrum between future and past, and the horizontal axis being one between moving from a spectrum of telling to asking. Generally, coaching would lie on the high end of the future and the high end of the asking. In mediation too, it's pretty much very similar to that, because it's pretty much future oriented. It's in terms of arriving at a conclusion. And it's very much, like Laila said earlier, it's a determination, self-determination. It's about asking, individual exploration. Whereas in counseling, I'm not disputing the fact that there could be counselors who are extremely good and who would look at the future as well. But as defined, counseling would very much, like Laila said, is a healing process where it's about the emotions, allowing people to reach a catharsis. And while it is very much the asking process, there's no telling process involved in that. It need not always be too much into the future. It's very much in the present moment. At that point in time, how do you make the person feel better? If in the process, if they are able to resolve something, that's great. So in marriage counseling, for example, yes, of course, the end objective is to make the two parties come together in some way or another. But at the same time, it is not as clearly defined as an outcome, a specific outcome apart from that in terms of the future as they would be in coaching or mediation. But this is something very broad, and I'm sure that someone would be able to say, no, this is not correct. I know of counseling, which is a lot more future focused as well. Perfectly okay. But this is generally, Laila, one other question that has been...
Can I just add to what you said, Ram? Sometimes in mediation, we do really have to go into the past. Like in a dispute between two founders of a startup company, I had to go I mean, the lady, it was a man and a woman, and this woman had an earlier divorce, and she had a failed startup earlier, and she was coming to negotiate the difficulties with the second startup. I really could not bring her to the negotiation table without addressing her emotions regarding her first failed startup and her failed marriage. So the mediator has to go into that. But there is a point of time when you say, now I'm going to draw the line to the past, and now let's look at the future.
Yeah.
So I think we don't go into the past like the counselors do, but to some extent we do go into the past to understand what are the underlying interests, and also to help them access their logical brain. If it's the emotional brain, if it's the limbic brain, then they're not able to take those decisions, and we work with that also a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant, Laila. So one of the earlier questions from Terry, what format does the enhanced collaboration worksheet take, and what guidelines for its content?
Okay, so this is where I was looking at the dynamic nature of mediation. Once you're a process expert, you can, I mean, this is something which you innovate, and depending on each case, you work with it. I mean, you can read several textbooks, but eventually when you have that process expertise, you know where you're getting, and you do it rather intuitively, so it comes.
Okay. There was a question which I've just answered. Solution focused counseling as a particular niche of counseling has similar objective to mediation. Absolutely. Could be as well for coaching as well. So I find tremendously there's a lot in common. And one of the reasons I would say that is Carl Rogers, who's considered to be father of counseling, as far as I'm concerned, and what we teach is he's also the father of coaching. And his whole concept of unconditional positive regard and so on are as relevant to coaching as it would be to counseling. And it would also be relevant to mediation as well, because the people who are mediating really have to have that regard for the clients with whom they are working. Question from Grace. It seems to me that for commercial corporate companies, while the nature isn't primarily emotional, if the outcome is to succeed, that is to be more than simply compliant, it's very elaborate. To have true collaboration, it seems to me that some degree of transformation, etc., must be involved. Probably the answer is yes. Are you able to see the question? It's more a statement. The fundamental point Grace making is to have true collaboration in a corporate environment. There should be some degree of transformation that needs to happen in terms of the resolution.
Absolutely. Okay. At least it has to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, Laila, before we move on to Chitra to talk about a few cases in her corporate experience that she has come across with, now that she's wearing a mediator's hat, how it be done. Is there anything else that you want to cover before we move on to Chitra as well?
I think that, there are no strict lines nowadays. People are combining so many of these roles. We have mediation coaching. Parties are coached to participate in mediation, or pre-mediation, a coach comes in and prepares the parties, or post-mediation, there's a coach coming in. So these lines are blurring between counseling and coaching and mediation, and yet the focus changes as you move from one to the other.
Yeah, especially in listening. For people, I think that's an extraordinarily important criterion, not only for the mediator, but for the parties involved. So Chitra, would you like to come in and talk about some of your experiences? You're muted.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you, Laila, for setting that context. What I'd like to really stress upon is two points. First is, why is mediation becoming increasingly a preferred alternative dispute resolution option? And two, where do coaches, given they're so integral to organization growth, organizations' development, where do they fit and where is the common ground with mediation? Let me address the first issue. Why is mediation becoming increasingly important in the commercial sphere? The West, particularly countries like US and some of the more developed countries which has in the past had cross-border businesses, have found any disputes, the minute it goes into arbitration or litigation, is very, very expensive and time-consuming. And the flip side is when they go into mediation, they find it's rational arguments which are mediated by experts to come through with some sort of a solution. Now, what happens in such situations, however complex or simple that this issue in a commercial sphere is, what it has proven time and again is it saves time, it saves cost, it saves reputation, it sort of preserves the confidentiality, it embodies some sort of an integrity of process, and above all, it's enforceable. So when you take all these ingredients, it genuinely delivers what I would say a very good win-win solution for both commercial parties. And that's why countries like USA and others have rooted for commercial mediation for many, many decades. And the Asian countries are now catching on. Closer home, if I talk about India, Laila touched on this, we have the commercial court, which has now made mediation mandatory when it comes to commercial disputes. And likewise, the Singapore Convention, where 46 countries signed an agreement to make mediation a first preferred option. It just shows the Asian countries, including China, who's a signatory, that they all believe that in commercial disputes, it makes eminent sense to go for mediation before you think of arbitration or litigation. And that is where, when you think about coaches, the role of coaches in any organization and the skill sets that they bring in, when we've done our thinking around it, we find all of those skills honed a little more makes great mediators amongst the coaches. And before I share how those skills really fit, let me take a few very quick case studies. Okay, I'll keep this very simple and brief in the interest of time. And a couple of these cases, some where mediation was the first preferred option, and some, after going through a bit of pain, they went to mediation. The first example I can talk to you about is a very famous example is Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook, where when Facebook started becoming pretty popular and it was making money, two of his buddies who were in Harvard, the Winklevoss twins, as they are called, filed a case on him to say that we were one of the founders of Facebook at Harvard, and therefore we need to get as much of the money as he has. This went into a huge, and you can imagine the high stakes in it. And what really happened is they called in an expert mediator, and without going into details, it's all written in books and magazines, they managed to resolve. And the beauty of it is both parties came out as winners and no party felt they were losers. And what is most surprising is the same twins who took the case on Mark is now going to be working with Facebook, is now going to be working with Facebook on the digital currency. The twins have made billionaires through their very famous Bitcoin business and enterprise. And now that Facebook has got its own digital currency, Libra, they both going to work again. So what mediation in this case has done is, even in an extreme situation where there was so much enmity at that time, got resolved through mediation, and now the relationship is continuing for the next phase of business. And it tells you the ill will is gone through mediation. So that's a great example. The second big example is Lehman Brothers. You would all know that back in 2008, when the global financial meltdown happened, and Lehman Brothers was the first one that went under bankruptcy, they had, again, expert mediators come and resolve this entire issue. It's a very complex one, but they did it. So what we're really saying is no commercial dispute, big or small, can go through the filter of mediation. I think that's a huge, huge point to remember. Even in India, I can tell you 2 cases where they realized mediation was the right way to go, but a little later, and now they've gone that way. The first one was McDonald's. McDonald's had 2 franchisees in India, very good business, which grew very well for about 10 years plus. And then they ran into some differences with one of their franchisees, and they're big franchisees. And for the last 4 years, they were squabbling, there was spat, loss of business, and huge issues in the whole industry. And McDonald's lost extensively in terms of market share, and it made ugly news. Then they realized the best way to resolve this is through mediation, and that's exactly what's happening currently. And they're close to a solution, almost done. The other case, which I can again talk about, is PepsiCo. PepsiCo in India went on to file a case on a small handful of Gujarat farmers on what you consider a proprietary potato seeds, which these farmers got through some source which they didn't think was legit. And PepsiCo filed a case on these half a dozen farmers. The media went ballistic. It was like a story of David and Goliath. And they said, how could a huge MNC crucify a half a dozen farmers? And PepsiCo later realized they should have actually mediated this issue. They knew they were on the right side, and the farmers were not on the right side. And then they got someone to come and mediate. So here are a few quick cases to just tell you, however big, however complex, mediation clearly in the commercial space is the first preferred option. And if it doesn't work, or you could get to arbitration, litigation, and we all know the downsides of it. So that's, without dwelling too much, I think all corporates today, both out in the West and in Asia, feel, however big or small they are, feel it is mandatory to have their contracts with mediation as the first option, and then they can go into arbitration or litigation if mediation doesn't work. So let's think about companies increasingly, or the commercial space increasingly requiring tons of mediators in the future because of the economic activity, not just domestically, but cross-border internationally. So that's the context. Now, where do coaches, with all their soft skills that we know, and you as coaches know what your soft skills are. And if you think about mediation, which Laila spent extensive time on the process, the skill sets that's required is very much what the mediators really have, and the coaches have. And I've noted it down for the sake of brevity.
Yeah, Chitra, if I may interrupt you, there's a question for you which would be relevant before we go there.
Yeah.
You talked about external issues as far as corporates are concerned, where mediation becomes an accepted practice. Elaine has asked a question which is about internal mediation within employees. Maybe it's between unions and employees, or in this particular case, she asked a question about employee conflict, termination, for example, and so on. How much of mediation can be used in such cases?
I think increasingly mediation will become the force, because normally this internal conflicts try to get resolved by managers or by HR, or you get sent through some coaching. But I think in order to bring a very objective resolution to whatever conflicts you call that an organization has, they will be turning to mediators. And so the answer is mediation to resolve internal conflicts will be increasingly the way to go. And it will, yeah.
In fact, I mean, with my own experiences for several years, I mean, these days they're not that common, when we used to have major union settlements in large companies. And what was really practiced was mediation. Otherwise, everything would have gone to the courts. But there were people who sat down and negotiated and arrived at solutions or contracts. So sorry, I stopped you from going into whatever you were going into.
Yeah, no. And to your point, Ram, that's exactly, I've negotiated with the unions, and I find that if I'm directly negotiating with them, and this, I'm talking about 20 years ago with very tough unions in the western part of India, you know, it was always good to bring in so-called mediators. Those days we didn't have really trained mediators, but those who knew the psychology of both sides and the commercial, imperatives on both sides. So to the question asked by one of the attendees, is absolutely, this is going to be a very big, point of growth for mediators as an opportunity. And that's where I think, coming to the point that I was going to just make, is the common ground that coaches and mediators have. See, both are solution driven, and the process in a broad sense is very, very similar. So whether you're doing coaching or whether you are in a process of mediation, what do? You facilitate and support the parties. You very constructively, you want to do that very, very constructively. You sort of follow a process, and you follow a process where you want to be sure that the parties feel they are in control of the process. You are not imposing stuff. And that, I think, is very, very important. As Laila mentioned, you do that in coaching and you'll do that in mediation. And at the end of that process, you want to ensure that there is a timely solution, it's confidential, and it gets implemented. So all the soft skills that the coaches have is very, very similar, and I cannot help but say really similar to what the mediators have. So that is the big commonality. Now, where we feel the coaches really need to hone their skill for mediation is if the commercial interests are so, the stakes are high, and the commercial interests that you're talking about in the businesses are big, you may need help of business experts. And this is where it goes to Laila's point. You can bring in all kinds of experts into that mediation process. So thinking about it, you don't have to have necessarily a legal background. A legal understanding is good. And that's where the training or certification of mediators will help coaches navigate the process. But fundamentally, if you ask me, almost 70% of the coaching skills automatically fit the mediation skill. And there is that 30% where I feel, you need to hone your skill in the space of mediation. So in sort of a summary, in the interest of time, I think Tara might definitely put in. I'll quickly say the requirements for mediators are going to grow exponentially. Coaches are in a very prime position to become mediators, and therefore I would urge coaches to look at the space very positively and add a dimension to their professional skill.
Okay, thanks, Chitra. Now I just would like to move to Tara for a few moments before we close. Tara, I would like you to say a little bit about what you guys are doing with CAMP. To me, one of the things that tremendously inspires me is the kind of passion with which you are promoting mediation. I know Laila and you for years have been doing this, and which is why I find it extremely similar to the way that we went about coaching in terms of creating the awareness and making it a kind of a mainstream solution. And that's what you're trying to do as far as mediation is concerned. So would you like to say a little bit about, what are the things that you're trying to do now, and also potentially the kind of mastery webinar series that you might be offering for coaches to be trained as mediators with some certification, both from CAMP as well as from other institutions? Thank you.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you, Ram. Thank you for putting together and for bringing in the coaching community to hear more about mediation. As you've heard, the environment is well poised for this process to take off. From the internal voice of Chitra, the corporate voice of Chitra, there is a need for this process, and coaches are well placed to enter, so extend the skills that they currently have to get into the mediation space as well. And in view of that, after the training that Ram did with us and Viji too did with us in Singapore International Mediation Center, we started having these conversations on how can we bring out this training to the community in a tangible, real way. CAMP is a private mediation institution. We are set up with the focus of encouraging disputes to go into mediation at the pre-litigation stage, or before parties need to access the court system, can they access mediation? And that's the drive that we have to set up CAMP. Another integral objective of CAMP is to create professional mediators. And for that, training is an important aspect. We typically it's over a 40-hour training that we conduct to go through mediation training. But with Coacharya, what we're trying to do is to build a mediation training program that will have both ICF certification and IMI. So IMI is the International Mediation Institute that provides international level certification for training programs. And we are working with this institution in the United States called Edwards Mediation Academy, which was started by Bruce Edwards, a leading mediator in the United States, one of the early mediators in the United States. So Bruce and his wife, Sue, have built this online training program. It's basically a pre-recorded training program. And with Coacharya, CAMP is working to see how we can use that as a resource so that we can build a program that ICF and IMI certification, where there will be facilitators facilitating the participants through 30 hours of live online instruction, in addition to 40 hours of pre-recorded training through EMA, the Edwards Mediation Academy. And through a combination where we can do simulations, role plays, act as mediators, hone the communication, listening skills that negotiation skills that we do in mediation, we hope to be able to put together this program. So as I said, one of our objectives is to be able to create more mediators out there in the community, more mediators more mediation gets to be known, more disputes that go into mediation, more disputes that are saved from going into the arduous process of litigation and arbitration. So a call out to this community, perfectly primed to expand your skill, get into this space as well. And we will be working with Coacharya, Ram, and Magda to bring this more out to the community. And we look forward to working with all of you on this.
Thanks, Tara. It'll be fantastic